Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Transfer portal season is upon us, and I want to take a deep dive into the Auburn Tigers and talk about particular positions and players they could be going after this transfer portal cycle. You know, Hugh Freeze is about to get very aggressive in the transfer portal, and I think what's most exciting for a lot of Auburn fans is what you just saw in 2023. That is the least talented roster you'll see under Hugh Freeze during his time at Auburn. Whether he's doing it on the high school recruiting trail, whether he's doing it in the transfer portal, this roster is about to go through a large overhaul in terms of injection of talent. Hugh Freeze is one of the best recruiters in the game, and you still were a solid team. And this team has a ton of ways that it can upgrade the talent. And at the end of the day, Brian Harsin did not leave this program in a very good spot from a talent standpoint. Hugh Freeze is going to go about changing that, and one of the best ways to do that is in the transfer portal. Really excited to get into this one. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys. A special shout out to the Auburn fans. This is a program we talked a lot about last transfer portal cycle. We covered a ton of high school recruiting in the summer. You guys always show a ton of support, so can't thank you guys enough. This is going to be a program that we're going to be talking about a lot during the coming weeks as they add some talent through the transfer portal. Going to be trying to cover as many of these roster moves as we can. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys as usual, and let's get into this. And I want to start with the quarterback position and kind of talking with some Auburn fans, reading some message boards. There's kind of two ways of thinking about this quarterback room. And one, don't go through the transfer portal. Work with Peyton Thorne and what you had, because he flashed that sometimes during this season. And then after Peyton Thorne, you have Walker White waiting in the wings. And I get that sentiment. That being said, you look at this quarterback room, and if you do lose Holden Gardner and you do lose a guy like Robbie Ashford, from a numbers standpoint, you probably do want to go out and get a quarterback. And at the end of the day, if I polled a lot of Auburn fans, I think they would say that the quarterback play can be upgraded heading into next season. And you're already seeing a ton of quarterbacks enter their names into the transfer portal. And this is not necessarily a knock on Peyton Thorne, who at times played some really good football for Auburn, especially towards the back half of the season. But I think you can do better. I mean, you look at Peyton Thorne's numbers, a 62% completion percentage for only 1,600 yards, 15 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. Got it done with his legs at times, but this offense felt a little bit one-dimensional for a majority of this season. And that lack of the downfield passing attack really hurt this Auburn offense. And yes, the wide receiver room was probably a problem too. We got some players to talk about in that room as well. I think you look at this quarterback room, and I think you can at least upgrade the competition in depth in this room. Getting into a few quarterbacks that I would certainly be taking a look at. The first guy, Riley Leonard, who's not in the transfer portal yet, but you talk about a name that could be entering in the portal in the next couple of days. Riley Leonard has to be at the top of the list. He's from the state of Alabama. His head coach, Mike Elko, just took the job at Texas A&M. There is a lot of reasons that Riley Leonard could transfer, and it's also one of those situations where he was getting overlooked at the high school ranks. And then he comes into college and absolutely dominates. You go back to that 2022 year where they went 9-4, 3,000 passing yards, 20 touchdowns, only 6 interceptions, and also can get it done with his legs. 700 rushing yards for 13 rushing touchdowns. This is a guy that not only is he from the state of Alabama, but he's also a guy that's played at an extremely high level when healthy for the Duke Blue Devils. And you imagine what he looks like with some better talent around him. And I think Riley Leonard would be an immediate upgrade as the quarterback one for the Auburn Tigers. The next guy I want to talk about, and again, a guy that I think would be a really, really big upgrade from the SEC, Will Rogers. I mean, second most passing yards in SEC history. A lot of people are saying he's going to transfer within the SEC so he can go and break that record. But at the end of the day, this is a guy that's been extremely productive, a ton of starting experience, in kind of that perfect stopgap scenario, right? You have Will Rogers comes in for his 5th and final year of eligibility. You have a young quarterback with a ton of talent in Walker White that gets the opportunity to sit behind a very experienced quarterback. And then you look at the 2025 season, and it's Walker White time. And so I think Will Rogers, from a quarterback runway scenario, would probably make a lot of sense for the Auburn Tigers to go out and add, and again, one of those guys that immediate upgrade from Peyton Thorne and adding that more two-dimensionality to this Auburn offense. The last guy I want to talk about, another guy that I think would be a really good fit in that Hugh Freeze offense, Will Howard. You go back to his 2022 year. This is a guy that won a Big 12 championship, has played at an extremely high level. And the only reason he's really transferring out of Kansas State is it sounds like they want to go with the younger quarterback next year. Will Howard, I think I would put him in the top 20 of quarterbacks at the Power 5 level. And again, Riley Leonard, Will Howard, Will Rogers, all three of those guys I think would be upgrades from what you had with Peyton Thorne last year. And you take a look at what this offense could be with quarterback play that gives you a little bit more two-dimensionality in that offense, you're going to see a massive improvement from this Auburn offense. Now, the next position that needs to be addressed in the transfer portal, and that's the wide receiver. As much as we want to get at the lack of quarterback play, I guess you'd say, the wide receiver play was not very good. You take a look at the numbers. Rivaldo Fairweather led Auburn in receiving yards with only 349 yards. So you didn't even have a pass catcher go over 350 yards, and your leading receiver was a tight end. That just tells you all you need to know about the wide receiver room for the Auburn Tigers last year. You're obviously losing some of those experienced transfers that you got last cycle. This is a position group that needs, I don't think just one wide receiver, but maybe 2, 3, or 4 new wide receivers injected into this room. First guy I want to talk about, and this is a combination of guys who are in the portal right now or are not in the portal, but I think would be great candidates to hit the transfer portal in the next coming days. And I want to go to the Iron Bowl rivals here in Ja'Cory Brooks, a guy that was a 5-star coming out of high school in that 2021 class. Kind of just got phased out. He's played some really good football for Alabama during his time in Tuscaloosa. It just seems like he's gotten phased out of this offense. They're going with some younger wide receivers. You ask me to have Ja'Cory Brooks in that Auburn offense, I think he's probably the best wide receiver in this Auburn wide receiver room like that. And he's played 3 years of SEC ball going into his 4th year. I think Ja'Cory Brooks would make a lot of sense for Auburn to go after. He's out of IMG, committed to Alabama. This would make a lot of sense for the Auburn Tigers. The next guy I want to talk about, staying in the SEC, a guy that's not hit the portal yet, but certainly think he could be because of the lack of quarterback play that's been in Lexington. This is Barian Brown. Now, Kentucky, I looked this one up. Kentucky and Auburn haven't played the last 2 years. This is a guy going into his 3rd year, elite playmaker. And if you're an SEC fan and you've been kind of keeping tabs on some other schools, you've seen some highlights of Barian Brown. Not only a difference maker at the wide receiver room, but as a runner with the football, a lot of end arounds, kick returner, punt returner, one of the more electric, dynamic playmakers that you see. Over 1,000 yards in his first 2 years at a Kentucky team that just really wasn't able to get much offense going. 10.49 100-meter dash time coming out of high school. You talk about adding some dynamic playmaking into this Auburn wide receiver room. Barian Brown, I think, would be one of the best guys to do so. The next guy I want to talk about, and the next two are guys that are in the transfer portal as we speak, and we're going to go back to a 5-star recruit out of the 2022 class in Chris Marshall. 6'3", 205, a ton of talent. Kind of a wild ride for Chris Marshall. Played his first year at Texas A&M, was part of that record-breaking Texas A&M class in 2022. Got some playing time. Actually played pretty well when he was on the field. Ends up transferring out of the program, goes to Ole Miss, gets dismissed from the Ole Miss program, spending his 2023 campaign at a junior college, at Kilgore Junior College, a guy that's been putting up numbers at the junior college level. And if you can do some background and make sure some of that off-the-field stuff is not going to be a problem, Chris Marshall would add so much talent to this room. And yeah, maybe a high-risk kind of guy in terms of maybe it doesn't play out, but what's the risk? I mean, I shouldn't say high risk because it's high reward bringing Chris Marshall. And if he pans out, he's an all SEC caliber wide receiver. And if it doesn't work out, he doesn't play. And that's kind of when I look at the transfer portal, taking flyers on some of these super talented guys that haven't quite put it together yet, to me makes a lot of sense. And Chris Marshall, I mean, he was supposed to be a really big contributor for Ole Miss heading into this year, but he gets dismissed from the program. Again, one of those guys that you put him at Auburn and he maximizes that talent, probably one of the best wide receivers in that Auburn room. Next guy I want to go to who is in the transfer portal and a guy that's a really interesting story. Winston Wright Jr. was a phenomenal wide receiver for West Virginia. After that 2021 year, he decides to transfer to Florida State, gets in a very bad car accident where he misses the whole 2022 season. He broke his leg, and then he battles back and was playing a decent amount for Florida State, ends up hitting the transfer portal because Florida State has so much talent in that wide receiver room. This is one of those examples of a guy that can play at a high level, but just kind of got squeezed out, kind of got buried in the depth chart. A little bit of a smaller guy, but with the football in his hands, he's one of the best in the country, and that's kind of what you want for Auburn. You take a look at how Hugh Freeze wants to run this offense. It's a lot of space. And Winston Wright is one of the better guys to operate in space in the country. He's a punt and kick returner as well, so you trust him with the football in his hands. Barian Brown, Ja'Cory Brooks, Chris Marshall, Winston Wright Jr., four guys that I think you bring in, and you're going to have a lot of success with a few of these guys. And at the end of the day, the wide receiver position, Auburn is in a pretty good spot here, because the wide receiver position is pretty easy to address in the transfer portal. There are a lot of talented dudes that are going to be hitting the transfer portal in that wide receiver room. And that's probably the biggest need for the Auburn Tigers on their depth chart. I would expect Hugh Freeze to bring in at least 3 or 4 guys, and they're probably going to be some of the more talented dudes in the country. You see what he's doing at the wide receiver ranks, in the high school ranks, flipping a guy like Perry Thompson from Alabama. Hugh Freeze can recruit wide receivers. I think wide receivers want to come play for this offense. This is going to be probably the most exciting position to monitor. Now, on the defensive side of the football, I mean, for one, Auburn played very good defense for the majority of this season. A couple of guys I want to look at, it's going to be on the defensive line, and it's going to be from the same school. First guy I want to talk about, Jafari Harvey, a veteran guy that's played really good football for the Miami Hurricanes, and a very similar conversation to Winston Wright Jr., kind of just got phased out with the new coaching staff coming in. This is a guy that's had 24 tackles for loss and 10 sacks during his career at Miami, going into his 6th year of college football. To me, it would make a lot of sense to go get a guy like Jafari Harvey to give you a little bit more juice coming off the edge. Jafari Harvey checks a lot of boxes in terms of what you want in an edge rusher. Really good juice off the line of scrimmage. He has that length. He has that power in his hands. This is a guy that, as a 6-year senior, probably comes in and starts or is a main contributor right away for the Auburn Tigers. In a very similar vein, we're going to go back to the Miami Hurricanes and talk about Nigel Lee Kelly. You're getting 2 guys that are really good football players that, again, with the new coaching staff, maybe getting a little bit phased out. A former top 100 recruit in that 2022 year from the state of Florida. The guy is a true freshman, 4.5 tackles for a loss, 4 sacks, was extremely productive and promising as a true freshman in 2022, and then just didn't really play much in the 2023 season. And a large portion of that is they had some really good edge rushers come in from that 2023 class. At the end of the day, a guy like Jafari Harvey, a guy like Nigel Lee Kelly can certainly play, and I think would be really good additions to this Auburn class. Now, the other position group that I think Auburn would need to take a look at is in the back end. They're going to lose a lot of veteran and very good players. If you can keep a guy like Keontae Scott, that would be massive for the Auburn Tigers, but there is going to be some guys in that secondary room that are also going to be brought in for the Auburn Tigers. It's hard to get a feel for those guys. I mean, Torino Pride at Clemson, I think, would make a lot of sense. Once we get more names that hit the portal in that back end, we'll talk more about Auburn targets in the secondary. But at this point, quarterback, wide receiver, and defensive line, you're seeing this roster come together. And so I think that's really exciting. A few areas where you want to improve, the transfer portal is going to give you that ability to do so. And again, Hugh Freeze is, I think, now fully kind of confident in what his personnel is. Keep in mind, Hugh Freeze took this job 12 months ago, didn't really know what the personnel was and who he had at what positions and if these guys could play football or not in the scheme that Hugh Freeze wants to run. After 12 months playing a full season, probably has a better feel of what kind of players he wants and what positions he does want. I expect Hugh Freeze to get very aggressive in this transfer portal. We're really excited to cover it for you guys again. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. If you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.